Yo, what's up guys? Today I'm gonna be showing you 7 freeze frame transitions that you can use for your music videos anywhere, anytime. These transitions are really slick, unique and versatile, so make sure to watch till the end because the last two are my personal favorites. If by any chance you think I'm being biased, make sure to watch till the very end. If I'm right, give the video a like, and if I'm not, I'm happy to take the L. So let's jump into it. Okay, I have my comp set up already. We're going to transition these two clips. And right at the beginning of the second clip, we want to get an outline of the subject. So what I will do, I don't want to go through the masking route. I'll show you a different trick. Hit Ctrl D. Let's just display these only. I will reduce the amount of time and then double click and then go for the roto brush tool. So I'm showing you a shortcut whenever you don't want to mask these using a pen tool. So I'll make a selection of the subject. Okay, once you make your selection right for the first frame, you want to go to your preview tab, and if you can see, just go on Windows and make sure it's enabled. I'm going to go one frame next, but I don't really care about the other frames, so I'll actually freeze it up to where it goes. Okay, so if I jump back to my comp, our first frame looks like this. So this is what we want. Click here to toggle the transparency grid, and then you want to export this frame. Go to composition, save frame as, and then select a PNG sequence. Make sure it has RGB and alpha so that it has that transparency. And then I'll send it to my downloads. Let's name this Didi Osama. Render that out. Come back and bring that to your scene. So I'll drag it back to my project. I'll drag my PNG right on this comp, and then I'll slice anything that's on my right, Ctrl+Shift+D, delete it. Once you have this one, let's go to that point which we took this screenshot. We'll need to scale it up to 200 and isolate that layer so that you can make sure it's the one. Once you're here, hit P to bring your position keyframe, hit R, and then you can also hit S, and then add all those keyframes and then let them stay here. Right at the beginning, you want to rotate it. Let's rotate it this side. And then you can also scale it down, and then you can manually push it to the left side. So we've altered the position, and then put all those keyframes on easy ease. And remember to enable motion blur on this one. And if we play this back, yeah. So make sure it only ends at this point so that it doesn't go on again. Now the second one is more or less an upgrade for this one. Hit Ctrl D on this layer twice so that you have two other layers. Hold Shift, click on all these PNGs, hit U. You can expand these. Now we want to offset the timing of these keyframes. So the ones that are right beneath, I'll put them closer to each other. And then these ones like that. Then these ones should start a little bit earlier. So you're creating something like a staircase of the sort. Now this will just offset the timing, and then it will bring more clones of these. And if we play this back, let me collapse these layers. Yeah, that's really slick. You can always play around with the timing. I feel like they've come a bit too fast on this one. So I'll expand my timeline to accommodate more footage. And then I'll expand these layers to the left side. We've added some time right here, and then we've taken these ones to the left a bit so that you can have a gradual pace on it. It was a bit too fast. And if we play it back, yeah. So that's really slick. On to our third freeze frame transition. I'll delete these 3 PNGs that were a clone of these. Now we'll need to bring that PNG again, bring it to our scene, and then we'll delete the excess on our right again, Ctrl+Shift+D. Now for this PNG right here, you want to add a keyframe for position. We won't take this very far, but we need to have the scaling at 200 also. Hit P to see your position keyframe. Since this is our last result, we push it at the end, and then we'll squeeze it to our left just a bit. I won't take it off the screen, and then go to your effects, look for hue and saturation, send it right there, Again, to your effects, add a shake. I use the sapphire shake, so I'll add it right there. And then I will also add a glow. I use the red giant universe glow. They all employ more or less the same things. Let me disable them. Start with the hue. Add a keyframe for the channel range. And then if you hit U on your clip, drag that keyframe to the end. And then right here, take the hue to around -170, anything just to change the colors like that. And then you also want to enable the shake, reduce the amplitude to around 0.5. The sapphire shake is usually too strong. I'll reduce the frequency also, so let me just preview it. Okay, let the frequency stay at 8, and then I'll reduce the amplitude to around 0.4. Yeah, I want some jittery feel like that one. And then it's not going to last all this time. It will appear right after everything. Yeah, and then let's enable the glow. For the glow, you can increase the threshold to reduce the intensity so that it's not too much. We are not adding any keyframes, so it should look something like this. Yeah, highlight on your keyframes, put them on easy ease, and then enable motion blur on that layer, so it should look something like this. Yeah, just making sure that it revolves around some color changes. For the fourth transition, we'll begin by rotoscoping the subject during this time frame. So I'll go to my rotoscope and then double click on that layer and then do the necessary. Okay, I'm done going frame by frame. That took about 10 minutes. I'll now freeze this frame. Once it's done analyzing, we'll go back to our selection tool and then back to our comp. And if we rub through this, you remember we had our transparency grid. That's why you see it like that. Now duplicate this layer, Ctrl D, and remove the roto brush from that layer. And then this is the D Osama roto brush. Now that we have our two layers set up, the roto brush and the background, we'll go to random areas within the timeline, within our comp, let's say at this point, and you're going to add a marker. So make sure to not select on any specific clip, but the comp itself. Go to layer, marker, add marker. So it's right here, and then we'll go a few frames. Let's add a marker at this point again. You can use your shortcut key. Then I'll add about 2 more. Okay, there'll be a total of 5. Add another marker. I'll isolate this roto brush layer, and then I'll also toggle my transparency grid. Now we'll go to our first marker, and then we'll export that image. So go to your comp, save frame as, and then it will be at your rendering. Go to these other ones and do the same. Okay, now back to our render queue. Make sure they are PNG, and RGB and alpha is enabled for all of them. Then give them a naming which is accordance to the layers. I'll give this one 01, 02, so that we don't have trouble lining them up. And then render all those. I'll import them to my project bin. 1 to 5. Okay, I've brought in the PNGs, and then we'll bring them into our timeline right around here, and we'll try to line them up. So make sure to also arrange them in the order. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's good. And then I'll go right here. I'll click on all of them and delete that excess. Now for these, you want to make sure that they appear when they appear. So for the first one, it will be there. And then the second one should start at this point. So we are creating something like a staircase. and you are also using the markers as a reference guide. Now you can start with the first one, hit P, enable that keyframe, and then go a few frames to the right, and then you can throw it to any direction. I can also see it's not proportional. We need to scale them at 200. So let me do the same for these others. Okay, now hit P again, and then let's throw it on the right side. We'll go to the second one, hit P, enable the keyframe, go a few frames to the right, and then we can throw it in whichever direction you want. And then I'll go to the other one and do the same. Okay, the last one, we throw it up, and then you want to highlight on all these keyframes and set them to easy ease. And last but not least, enable motion blur for those keyframes. Now let's preview these real quick. Yeah, you're kind of throwing them on all sides. And I also like the motion blur. If yours is a bit too much or too little, remember you can go to your composition settings, right click, this space, go to advanced. I like the shutter angle at 90 degrees for this specific one. If you want, you can also add keyframes for rotation and spin them as they go out. Now on to the fifth one. This is an advanced displacement freeze frame. I also have a tutorial on these, which I did a couple of months ago. We have these two scenes right here, and right on the second clip where he's at the kitchen, we'll take the first frame, okay, hit Ctrl D, and then freeze that frame. And then we're going to give it a different label color. We want to create a mask around different objects. So I can see this cooker right here. I can also use the window, and there is also the subject. There is also this item here for the ventilation. So we'll make about 4 of them. I'll hit Ctrl D so that we have 4 of them. Now let me isolate the first layer. Go to your masking tool. Make sure to be rendering at full resolution. Let's isolate this cooker. Okay, so that's our first selection. We can also name it cooker. And then let's go to the second one. Let's isolate this part right here. Okay, we have that one. Let's name this cooker vent, and then we'll isolate this other layer. Let's go around the window. So that's it, and then let's now isolate the subject only. Okay, let's go around him. Sorry if I was off the camera for a minute. Okay, we have our 5th subject. Let me hide the layer beneath. Now you can see we have our 4 items like that. Now with these ones, you want to take these layers above the first clip, make sure they overlap, and end right where the second clip begins. Highlight on all of them, hold shift, select on all of them. Now you can hit P, you can also hold shift, hit R, you can also hold shift, hit S. Now let's begin with the one with the cooker. Add those keyframes, push them to the end because that's our last result. Then we can rotate it if we want, but to rotate it centrally, we need to center the anchor point in the layer's content. We can also scale it like that, so it will just come like this. Okay, now for the position, you can also ensure that it goes off the screen. So you want to do something like this for all your keyframes, and then I'll put them probably closer so that it's a much faster transition. On to the next one, add those keyframes, push them to the end. Now before I change the values for these keyframes, I'll again center the anchor point inside the layers content. You can use your shortcut keys. For the original position, I'll drop it down. I'll also rotate it. This is not mandatory, but it will give you a really good look. And this one, I'll scale it up so that it scales to the normal proportion as it goes down. Now I'll go to the window, add the keyframes, push them. I hope you're noticing the common denominator in all of these. For the window, I'll just push it from the right hand side. I'll also scale it up and I leave the rotation. Honestly, let me disable that one. And then for the main subject, I'll add all of them, push those keyframes to the end, and then let him come from up top. We can scale him up and then push him up again. I don't feel the need to rotate it. Now I'll highlight on all these keyframes and set them to easy ease. Let's preview these real quick. Okay, this one doesn't go to its right place. The last position needs to be the default position. I'll redo this one. Now if we preview this animation, I will enable all these other layers so that you can see. Okay, that looks good. Although I feel like we can add something to spice this up. Go to those keyframes. I'll hit U for the cooker. I'll highlight on those keyframes. Make sure you're editing the speed graph and then push this yellow line to the left side so that it's faster in the beginning. And I'll make sure to do the same on these other layers. I've edited those graphs and the last step is adding motion blur to top it off. Now let's preview it from the top. Okay, by the looks of it, this seems like it's adding up correctly. Just make sure it goes up to the first frame for the next clip, like that. And then I'll enable these other layers. Now let's preview it from the top. Okay, I can notice the cooker isn't matched, so let's just look at it. I'll reset its parameters and fix it. Okay, before I enable the keyframes, I will first center the anchor point and then enable those keyframes. So that was the error I did. And then at the beginning, you can rotate it, you can scale it up, and then you can drop it down so that it comes like this. Okay, I'll put all these keyframes to easy ease. I'll also view these other keyframes so that I can put the timing right. And then, as I showed you earlier, highlight on all these keyframes, go to the graph editor, push that yellow line to the left. And now if we give these one more look, yeah, that's it. On to our sixth transition. We have the two clips again, but we start with the kitchen scene and then the tennis court scene. You want to begin by getting a roto brush of your first clip. I'll double click and then get a roto brush, and then I'll go around and get a selection of the subject. Okay, we have our subject figured out, and now I'll freeze that frame. Okay, that's done. I'll go back to my comp, switch back to my selection tool, and you can see we have the roto brush. Let me disable the transparency. I'll duplicate that clip and then name the one above roto, and then the layer that's right below will delete the roto brush from it. So we have the roto brush on this clip. If you're wondering why there is a curves adjustment, so it's so that it will help with the roto brush tool. Now we have our roto brush, and let's give it a different color. And then the second thing, you want to go at the first frame of your second clip, and then duplicate by hitting Ctrl D, then freeze that frame. Let's name this freeze frame 1. Okay, now with this first frame of the second clip, we'll drag it up and between the roto brush and the full scene, and then you'll cut whatever is on the right side. Now you can hit R, hold Shift, hit S, add keyframes for scaling and rotation, drag them to the right because that's our last output, and then initially you want to put it upside down 180 degrees, and you also want to scale it down something around 30-40 should look okay, and then put easy ease on the keyframes. Now it should look something like this. Again, I'll also hold Shift, hit T, add an opacity keyframe. Just let it go about 2 frames to the right so that it doesn't just appear out of the blues, and then it should look something like this. Okay, now remember to add motion blur for that layer, and then the last thing will be going to the last frame. I'll enable the roto brush layer only, and then we will export this as a PNG if we see it. Make sure it's RGB and alpha, and then let's name this Dizzy A. I'll import it into our project bin and into our comp and give it a different label color, so it should begin right at the end of this transition. I'll cut any of its excess. So once the transition gets to this point, let's scale it up to 200%. Now once it's right here, we need to get it out of the frame in a really smooth way. We need to add keyframes for scaling, but before we do that, let's just change the anchor point. The anchor point will determine the perspective with which it gets out of the frame. Pick this anchor point tool, place it right here. If we try scaling, you can see how it scales out. If we maybe set it on this other side and we try scaling it, it will go away in this direction. So it's whichever you choose. So I'll go to my selection tool, add a keyframe for scale, go to the right, and then bump that a turn. Again, put this on easy ease. Now you don't really need to have it move immediately, so I'll push these keyframes to the right, let it stay there for about 7 frames so that it's a bit dramatic. So it will depend with how you measure using your eyes. You can highlight on these 2 keyframes and then make sure it speeds up towards the end, not in the beginning, so that we have some time to see it fly away. Yeah, so that's the gist of it. Now onto the 7th transition. We'll more or less use the same layers that we had in the previous one. So we still have the rotoed layer, and then we have our first clip, the kitchen performance scene, and then the other clip which is at the tennis court. Right at the end of our first clip, this clip right here, we'll go to that last frame, hit Ctrl D to duplicate, right click and freeze that again. I'll give it a different label color, and then I'll squeeze it to my right side so that the video goes from this to this freeze frame. I want us to hit R and add keyframes for rotation, but before we do that, let's adjust the position of the anchor point. So I'll put it on this corner, okay, on the southeast. Go back to my selection point, enable the rotation keyframe, set it to the beginning, and then I'll go about 15 frames later, rotate it to go downwards. You can choose to go up, but I want to go downwards. And then put those keyframes on easy ease, so it should look something like this. Yeah, remember to add motion blur to that frame. Now to finish this off, right at the end of this first clip, remember we have our rotoed layer. Let me isolate that layer. On this last frame for the roto brush, we want to get the PNG and then animate it. Remember to toggle transparency here. We want to export a PNG of this last frame, which we did it in the previous transition. So I'll grab it here, I'll drag it to my timeline, and then I'll push it to begin on this side. I will enable all other layers. Now let's scale it up to 200%. Hit S, we want to add keyframes for scaling, but before we do that, let's adjust the position of the anchor point once again. Pick the anchor point tool, and then you want to move this anchor point somewhere on the right or maybe on the left, such that now if you come back to your scaling, it will go in a definite direction. So let's enable a keyframe, go later in the timeline, scale it up until the subject moves out of the frame. Okay, put it to easy ease. So if you watch it, it pops out of the frame pretty much faster. So squeeze those keyframes a bit to the right and let it sit here for some time. So it should look something like this now. You can highlight on those keyframes, adjust the speed so that it's fastest towards the end. And now if we play it back, it looks dope. We should also add motion blur. Yeah, that's really it. Okay, that's it. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you got the most out of it. In case you got lost anywhere, remember you can always rewind and trace back whatever it is. I will also be sharing a project file for this tutorial on my Patreon, so that is something that you can check out. In case you're unsure about the project file, I've already put each transition that we did into its own composition. That way you can trace it and follow it step by step, tracing all the keyframes and stuff. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're watching my content for the first time, hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. That way you get notified of my upcoming tutorials. My name is Danny James. See you in the next tutorial. Peace.